Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the massive, fascinating tightrope walk of India's agricultural economics. If you've ever wondered how a country with well over 1 billion people tries to keep its farmers from going bankrupt while simultaneously keeping food affordable for families, well, you're in the right place. Let's just jump right in because the mechanisms at play here are literally an economic high-wire act. But before we map out our journey, let's stop and ask a really crucial question. One that directly impacts both a farmer's livelihood and, honestly, your daily grocery bill. Why do food prices fluctuate so rapidly? And who really pays the price when they do? Think about it. Unlike manufacturing, say, a smartphone, growing crops is completely at the mercy of the weather, pests, and totally volatile supply and demand. And as we're going to see, those rapid shifts create a ripple effect that touches every single household. So here is our roadmap for decoding all these complex systems. We've got 6 main stops today: the price fluctuation problem, minimum support price, the downside of MSP, sugarcane and the FRP, stabilizing prices for consumers, and finally, the agricultural market system. All right, let's start right off with Section 1, the price fluctuation problem. Looking at research from StudyIQ IAS, we hit a pretty harsh economic reality right out of the gate. Wild price fluctuations harm absolutely everyone, but they definitely don't harm everyone equally. During periods of severe inflation, it's the low-income consumer who suffers the most. When basic staples skyrocket in price, those essential goods are suddenly pushed entirely out of reach. But, on the flip side, if prices totally crash, the very producers growing our food face absolute financial ruin. So this kind of instability is a massive threat to national welfare. And that inherent volatility is exactly why the government brings in an agricultural price policy to act as basically a giant economic seesaw. Now, this isn't just about throwing money at a problem. It's a highly structured framework designed to achieve economic growth, equity, and essential food security at both the macro-national level and the micro-household level. It's a really ambitious dual mandate. You've got to protect the producer's income, but you also have to protect the consumer's plate. Which brings us to Section 2. Minimum support price. So to protect producers from just completely losing their shirts during bumper crop years, the government introduces this massive safety net. The minimum support price, or MSP, is essentially a guarantee price fixed by the government right at the start of the sowing season. Imagine a farmer harvesting a record-breaking crop. In a totally free market, that massive supply would cause prices to absolutely plummet, which, crazily enough, effectively punishes the farmer for having a great harvest. So the MSP acts as a direct market intervention. It ensures that no matter how far market prices fall, the government will step in and buy the produce at this guaranteed baseline. Now, what's really interesting here is the scope. The government doesn't just guarantee prices for everything grown in the ground. Currently, this MSP umbrella covers exactly 22 mandated agricultural crops. And this beautifully breaks down into 14 kharif, or monsoon season crops like paddy and cotton, 6 rabi, or winter crops, including wheat and mustard, and 2 commercial crops, specifically jute and cobra. By declaring these prices before the sowing season even starts, farmers can actually make calculated decisions about what to plant. Of course, picking that exact guarantee price is a pretty monumental task. The heavy lifting of calculating these precise numbers is done by the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. They're an attached office of the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers' Welfare, and they've been doing this crucial math since 1965. They analyze the cost of production, market trends, supply chain logistics, the whole shebang, just to recommend a fair MSP to the government. But let's move on to Section 3, the downside of MSP. Because what happens when a solution creates its own set of unintended consequences? While the MSP is an absolute lifeline for many, it's definitely not without some heavy academic and economic critiques. Moving quickly through these unintended consequences, we actually see that MSP can drive up inflation. Why? Well, because as the government consistently raises that floor price to support farmers, the general market price naturally trends upwards too. Plus, this system tends to disproportionately benefit large farmers in surplus-producing states, mainly because they have the excess volume to actually sell to the government. And perhaps most worryingly for the environment, it acts as a dangerous deterrent to necessary crop diversification. Because crops like wheat and paddy have a secure, guaranteed buyer, farmers are heavily incentivized to overproduce them. That distorts natural cropping patterns and totally drains vital soil and water resources. Let's pivot slightly to Section 4, sugarcane and the FRP. Okay, so it's absolutely crucial to understand the difference between MSP and FRP. Unlike the MSP, where the government acts as a willing buyer of last resort for those 22 crops, sugarcane falls under an entirely different set of rules called the Fair and Remunerative Price, or FRP. The FRP is a legally bound price declared by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. The major difference here, it's who is doing the buying. Under FRP, the sugar mills themselves are legally forced to pay this set price directly to the sugarcane farmers for their procured crop. They can sometimes sign agreements to pay it in installments, but the key takeaway is that it shifts the financial burden of the guarantee from the government directly onto the industrial buyer. So, we've seen how the producer is protected. Let's look at Section 5, stabilizing prices for consumers. If you recall what we talked about earlier, low-income consumers suffering during inflation, well, this is the government's answer. To shield your grocery bill from hoarding and wild speculation, the government actively maintains a strategic buffer stock of essential grains. When prices start to soar, they step in. They release these commodities to the public at deeply subsidized rates known as issue prices. This massive operation relies on a huge network of fair price shops and ration depots, what we broadly know is the public distribution system. It's a direct injection of affordable food meant to stabilize the broader market. To manage the massive financial weight of all these operations, there's a dedicated price stabilization fund. And the 50-50 ratio really brilliantly illustrates the shared responsibility required to pull this off. The center and state governments contribute equally to this fund at a 50-50 ratio. It's kept ready to go in a separate revolving bank account managed by the Small Farmers Agribusiness Consortium. Though I should note, for northeastern states, this burden is eased just a bit, with the central government taking on a 75-25 split. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, the agricultural market system. You see, none of these price guarantees actually matter if the crops can't get from the farm to your plate. As defined by the National Commission on Agriculture, agricultural marketing is a massive, multi-step process. It encompasses everything from the very first pre-harvest decision of what to plant, all the way to the highly functional and institutional aspects of assembling, grading, storing, transporting, and eventually distributing the commodity. It is literally an incredibly complex supply chain built on thousands of technical and economic considerations. And because agriculture is constitutionally a state subject in India, the initial sale of a farmer's product usually happens in regional APMC Mandis. These are state-level market committees designed to facilitate fair trade. But they definitely don't operate alone. They're heavily supported by massive central bodies that actually implement the policies we've been talking about. Organizations like the Food Corporation of India, the Cotton Corporation of India, and the Jute Corporation of India. They are the boots on the ground, actively stepping into these markets to procure goods at the MSP and build up those vital buffer stocks. Serving as the ultimate legal backdrop to all these markets is the Essential Commodities Act of 1955. This historic piece of legislation was enacted to legally guarantee that basic necessities remain easily available to the public. Basically, if the government senses that critical supplies are being hoarded just to artificially drive up prices, they can invoke this act. They can regulate production, supply, and distribution, and essentially force those essential commodities back out into the open market. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you to ponder this overarching reality. We've explored the safety nets of MSP and FRP, the massive logistics of the Food Corporation of India, and the sheer scale of the public distribution system. But that central tension, it's still there. Is it truly possible to perfectly balance the economic livelihood and growth of the farmer with the survival and affordability needed by the consumer? Or will this grand economic seesaw, heavily weighted by essential government control in an unpredictable free market, just always be in a perpetual state of motion? It's a huge question, and one that absolutely continues to define India's agricultural journey. Thanks for learning with us today.